Okay, last test review of the semester. Do you recognize some old friends or old foes on this slide? Yep, we've included some Hindu and Buddhist art review questions on this test, as well as the new Unit 7 review questions. They're all up on Moodle for unlimited attempts, and they're all titled Unit 7 review questions. The Unit 7 matching questions will also be on the test. So why are we putting sticks and lumps of coal in your Christmas stockings? When we first put our units together, we faced a choice, really a dilemma. We could use religion as a unit organizing theme, or we could teach Asian works altogether. Our compromise was to teach Hindu, Buddhist, and Muslim works together so that we could relate this art to religious beliefs and practices, as well as to the national cultures that produced them. That left us with a rump of Asian works that became this unit. As I went through Chinese, Korean, and Japanese art in my podcast, I tried to fit Buddhist art back into your mental timeline. And now Buddhist as well as Hindu art will show up on the test. The good news, however, is that no Hindu or Buddhist art questions will appear on your semester final. The semester final will not have matching questions, but it will have 100 multiple choice questions, all taken from earlier unit review quizzes. You will also write a long essay. I've recorded a separate test review for that. So, are the Chinese dynasties all jumbled together in your head? Here's a cheat sheet to help you establish a timeline and to keep your required work straight. I don't know if it helps you to insert Asian history into a mental timeline with the history from other regions. It does help me, but I'm a history geek. So, I like to think about the Han Dynasty as being about the same time as the Roman Republic and Empire, straddling either side of the BCE-CE line. The Tang Dynasty comes at about the same time as Muhammad's life and the great Muslim conquest of the Middle East, Central Asia, North Africa, and Spain. Charlemagne also established his empire during the Tang Dynasty. I just note that by almost every measure, Chinese civilization was wealthier and more advanced than European civilization at this time, although some of the Islamic caliphates could give them a run for their money. The Mongol Conquests coincided with the High Middle Ages and the horrible 14th century. The same Black Death that killed off about a third of Europe's population also devastated China. It is one of the reasons, some historians think the most important reason, why the Mongol dynasty collapsed. Ming Dynasty comes at about the same time Europe entered the Renaissance and the Age of Exploration, and eventually the Europeans came calling in China, first to purchase tea, silk, and porcelain, and then later, during the Qing Dynasty, to throw their weight around. We talked a little about Mao, but not about what came after him. China is still a communist country to this day, and I would argue that its rulers are still trying to prove that they hold the mandate of heaven. After Mao's death, the country opened up economically and is now an economic and military superpower. Politically, however, Chinese leaders have tried to keep a tight lid on dissent and free speech. I'll talk more about that in a minute. Korea's history is easier to keep straight. Silla was one of the three kingdoms, and it produced the Gold Crown. Ties with China grew much closer during the Tang Dynasty and also during Mongol rule. Korea pretty much adopted the Neo-Confucian philosophies and examination systems of China, although Buddhism remained the state religion. The Joseon dynasty ruled around the same time as the Ming and Qing dynasties in China and had close ties with them. The portrait of an imperial official dates from this period. After Japanese occupation, World War II, and Korea split into North and South, Korea developed a dynamic economy and eventually a much freer and more democratic political system. It has strong ties to the West, and by the way, about 30% of the Korean population is now Christian. On to Japan. The great temple complex at Todaiji was built during the Nara period, when the imperial court was trying to strengthen its position by adopting Buddhism as a state religion and impressing its powerful and somewhat scary Tang Dynasty neighbors with a huge Chinese-style temple complex. A lecturer I listened to compared this with hosting the Olympics. Hey, look, we're rich and powerful too. We share your religion, so don't mess with us, please. We don't have works from the Heian period with its aristocratic court culture, even though these paintings influenced later Yamato painting. Military rulers took over in 1185, and in 1600, they pretty much shut Japan off from the world. Japanese history paintings with warlike themes became very popular. Lots of samurai brandishing swords, and later guns. Think of our night attack on Sanjo Palace. But Zen and Pure Land Buddhism, among other forms of Buddhism, also influenced Japanese art. And we see this especially in the Zen garden at Ryoanji. Yamato-e painting took a turn toward middle-class taste during the Edo period, with lots of stylized nature themes that also reflected the Zen Buddhist influence. In the early 19th century, woodblock prints provided relatively inexpensive art for the middle class and made a huge impression on European and American artists. In the 20th century, Japan brought us World War II in the Pacific, Sony transistors, Toyota and Honda cars, Nintendo, and anime. Our global contemporary work, Pure Land, mixes Zen Buddhism with computer game-style elves. You've probably gathered that this is not one of my favorites. Ooh, the history of 3 major countries in what, less than 5 minutes? The ghost of history teachers past may haunt me this Christmas, and frankly, I deserve it. Anyway, on to our works. I warned that this work would appear on the test, which is a little mean since I didn't have time to discuss it in my podcast, but I'm worried about all the global contemporary works we'll be throwing at you in the spring, so I thought it made sense to introduce this one, especially since it pairs so appropriately with Chairman Mao. I just gave you a little crash course in recent Chinese history. The Cultural Revolution of 1966 to 1976 was Mao's attempt to maintain revolutionary fervor after his Great Leap Forward had turned into more like a great leap into a deep, dark pit. If you want to know more, and I really hope you do, I put a very good video about this period of Chinese history up on Moodle. When Mao died, the leadership pretty much abandoned the economic and political radicalism. The message, essentially, was enjoy your newfound wealth and keep your mouth shut. Chinese students, in particular, did not want to shut up. They started asking for more political freedom. To their credit, they wanted more from life than blue jeans and rock music. The story did not have a happy ending. The student uprising protests were put down brutally by the military, and political oppression continued. Today, China leads the world in efforts to control the internet. I'm counting on your generation's computer wizards to keep the lines of the information highway open. So this work, what is called an installation, a large-scale work set up in a museum, was shown in China in 1988, just before the massacre. The authorities soon cracked down on what to their minds had to be a subversive work, and the artist fled to the United States, where he worked for 18 years. He now, once again, resides in Beijing. Like many of the works we've seen, this is a tribute to an older cultural tradition. Zhu Bing painstakingly carved all of these wooden blocks and printed up reams and reams of pages from his book From the Sky. This kind of woodblock printing was an ancient Chinese technology, although we've seen it was later used by the Japanese to produce prints for the mass market. What made this a subversive work instead of a tribute to the ancient Chinese arts of painting and calligraphy? Well, the answer is that these meticulously carved and printed characters, some 4,000 of them, are complete nonsense. The communist officials thought they must be some kind of dangerous secret code, but in fact, what the artist has created are reams and reams of meaningless characters. Chinese audiences can't read them any better than we can, although at first they expect to, which makes their experience of this work rather different from that of non-Chinese Westerners. So what's the artist's point? The original title was Mirror to Analyze the World, the century's final volume, which suggests it was a commentary on our age. But the artist later changed the name to Yan Shu in Chinese. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, by the way. In Chinese, this means divine writing, and originally referred to certain kinds of religious texts. Now the term is generally used to mean gibberish. This work is likewise a commentary on mass production and commercialism, which it clearly influenced it. And of course, the artist is attacking government propaganda from Mao's Little Red Book on. And finally, this may be a commentary on the meaninglessness of language, or our inability to communicate, or the meaninglessness of life in our technological age. As you've probably guessed from all these possible explanations, the artist did not provide a definitive explanation of his own work. He wants us to figure it out for ourselves, and we're going to see a lot of that when we get to 20th and 21st century works at the end of the school year. And we will come back to this work in the spring when we look at global contemporary works and specifically at political protest art. But I really felt that A Book from the Sky fit into this unit as well, as an answer to Mao, as a shout out to older Chinese artistic and cultural traditions. I've actually given you everything you need to answer the test questions, but if you'd like to know more, or feel more comfortable knowing more, the Khan Academy video about this work is up on Moodle and it's only 5 minutes long. So I talked about this in my podcast, and this slide gives you a big hint. Remember that the College Board will sometimes ask you to attribute a work you haven't seen to an artist whom you've studied. This one should not be tough, especially when you see Mount Fuji appearing in all of them. And yes, one or more of these images will appear on the test. So who's the artist? This is why we're making you learn all those names on the matching test, right? What was the purpose of making these works? Remember, they are prints, and remember how Japanese society was changing in this period. Who was buying art? What advantage did prints offer over paintings? I talked about this in my Japan podcast. I also mentioned this, although I plan to talk about it more in the spring. What Western development did this artist borrow, a technique he'd seen in books about the Italian Renaissance and Dutch Baroque painters? Here is a very big hint. If you still don't recognize this technique, check it out in your textbook from pages 84 to 89. We'll be talking a lot about it in January. So what's new about this work and what is old? And again, I got it right side up or right side down this time. What event does this poster commemorate? What is striking and perhaps unusual about the faces of these terracotta soldiers? There are several image-based questions about this work. What was their function? What were they made for? Remember that we know the answer to this quite precisely. What kind of images appear on the vases, and where might the artists have gotten the idea for these images? The two Tang Dynasty works on the right offer a big hint. What information did the inscription provide? This is an accept question, by the way. You need to know the inscription. What material are they made of? And you need to know a little detail about how this work was made. Again, I talked about this in my podcast, and it's discussed in your readings as well. Where was this work found? Why did art historians originally think it had been intended only for burial? And why is it still clear that it was not used frequently? Kings didn't just hang around in their throne rooms sporting their crowns. What do the various projections on the crown, the upright elements, probably represent? What Chinese philosophy primarily influenced this artist and this work? What is the relationship between people and nature in this philosophy and in this painting? What kinds of materials and brushstrokes did the artist employ? By the way, these questions are relevant to your semester final essay as well. What do Tibetan Buddhists believe about the origin of this statue? One hint, the viewer did not enter this garden. Hint, this is a Vairocana Buddha. What other huge work is also a Vairocana Buddha? And what earlier giant Buddha from further west probably influenced both of these works? These two images appear together in a question. What political purpose did the temple on the bottom serve for the rulers who built it? What do these works have in common? Anyway, good luck on this test and on the semester final. Just think of how much you've learned, how much you've accomplished since August. I am truly impressed.